Lucy Frazer is the Culture Secretary, and she had a car crash interview on Sky News. When pressed on the matter of the BBC being biased, it's clear she didn't really want to answer the question and she was completely out of her comfort zone. It's strange because everybody on the right thinks the BBC is biased towards the left, and everyone on the left thinks it's biased towards the right. But remember, the BBC's chairman is appointed by the government, and although it's supposed to be impartial, it's very well known that they toe the government line. We have Laura Koonsberg, the BBC's political editor, that will tickle the tummies of the Conservatives and really hammer home with the opposition parties. And a couple of examples after the clip as well. We've got Emily Matus, who was suspended for her opening monologue, and the BBC for cutting out the word Brexit from their live reporting when it's reposted later on. As for the interview, Lucy Frazer doesn't really have an answer on what evidence there is, and when pushed further on other channels that might have a political bias, I mean, we're talking GB News here, she refused to name any other stations, mainly because most of her colleagues have jobs there. So here we go. Here's Lucy Frazer making a complete fool of herself.
The BBC and whether or not they are as impartial as they might be online. Which other outlets are you also looking into?
Well, what you're talking about is a midterm review that we've published today. And what that is about is the fact that although the BBC is the most fantastic public institution, it's really important that the public maintains its trust in it. And what we've heard from audiences is that some people think it's biased. Some people think that their complaints aren't heard. Well, what I've looked at is the evidence. And the evidence from Ofcom is that 39% of complaints last year were in relation to impartiality, whereas the previous year they were 19%. So there is a perception amongst audiences that the BBC
perception isn't necessarily reality.
Well, there are only perceptions, and perceptions are important. What's important about the BBC is that it's funded by the public. So the perceptions of audiences, of the public, are important. And although it's a trust in the BBC in terms of accuracy are good, in terms of impartiality, audience faith in the BBC has gone down. And so that's why we have published today, having worked with the BBC, a number of measures to enhance impartiality and also in relation to strengthening independent scrutiny of complaints, which is really important because if audiences want to complain about the BBC, they should feel like they're being heard.
Do you think the BBC is biased?
Well, I am looking at this from the point of view of the Culture Secretary.
Yeah, and that's why I'm asking you.
And,
so do you think they're biased?
And the evidence shows that there is a perception of bias in relation to the BBC.
What do you think? Do you think, as Culture Secretary, that the BBC is biased?
I think that on occasion it has been biased, yes.
In relation to what?
Well, this report isn't about incidents, but we have seen recently that it's had to apologise for its own reporting, for example, in relation to the attack in the hospital in Israel, so in Gaza.
What's the difference between mistake and bias, surely?
Well, there is a perception amongst the public that the BBC is biased, and as Culture Secretary, it's important that I look at that. I must say, these are issues that I have discussed with the BBC. They've taken on board.
Yeah, but I'm asking you about the evidence of bias. Where's the evidence?
The evidence of bias is what audiences believe is the content of the BBC and
but that's
how
perception,
they...
That's not evidence. That's perception.
That is evidence. That is evidence. Impartiality is about perception of the things that are being broadcast by the BBC, and the evidence in relation to that perception is that...
perception and evidence are different things.
The evidence from Ofcom, having done studies and questionnaires of the public, is that the BBC's ratings in relation to impartiality have gone down. And I and the BBC think that there is more that the BBC can do in order to improve that.
Which other broadcasters are you investigating? Which other broadcasters do you feel potentially are not impartial?
The reason we've done this review is because the BBC is in a special position.
Yeah, but I'm asking you which other broadcasters you think are not impartial.
My job as the Culture Secretary is to... it has a special role in relation to the BBC, and the reason for that is because the BBC is funded by the public.
I understand that, but I'm asking you whether you think other broadcasters might not be impartial.
Well, other broadcasters, I must say with respect, are in a totally different position to the BBC because they're not funded by the public.
Still need to be
because
impartial.
Because they're not governed.
According to the Ofcom code.
Yes, but the BBC is in a particular position for two reasons. One, it is funded by the public, and second, it is governed by a charter. And the reason we've done this review is because it was set out a number of years ago that between charter reviews, there's an 11-year period between charter reviews, there should be a mid-term review. That's what this is. I haven't suddenly decided one day to do a review of the impartiality.
No, I understand that,
of the
but I'm
BBC.
asking you about other broadcasters and whether they're also impartial.
So all broadcasters, as you say, who choose to be governed by Ofcom,
which
have rules in relation to impartiality, and Ofcom regulates those and looks very closely at those rules in relation to impartiality. But it's very different to the BBC.
Good evening. Dominic Cummings broke the rules. The country can see that, and it shocked the government cannot. The longer ministers and Prime Minister tell us he worked within them, the more angry the response to this scandal is likely to be. He was the man, remember, who always got the public mood, who tagged the lazy label of elite on those who disagreed. He should understand that public mood now, one of fury, contempt and anguish. He made those who struggle to keep to the rules feel like fools and has allowed many more to assume they can now flout them. The Prime Minister knows all this, but despite the resignation of one minister, growing unease from his backbenchers, a dramatic early warning from the polls and a deep national disquiet, Boris Johnson has chosen to ignore it.
It's no wonder it's a hike in inflation. The import costs and the cost of bringing containers through is massive. The petrol has jumped diesel prices, so it's costing hundreds of pounds extra a week to transport the goods, and the public are the people that will suffer.
Say to me.
I said to you, everything that we're bringing in from abroad, which is a lot of the frozen goods, a lot of we import from Greece and Turkey, the bass and the bream. The price of a container pre-Brexit, because it's nothing to do with Brexit, pre-Brexit was £3,000 just over for one container. The same container containing the same goods cost £14,000 now.
I don't know why they keep sending out people that just aren't very good at interviews. I've got a whole playlist that's dedicated to some of the best car crash interviews. So go have a giggle, watch that next, and it's on the screen now. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to hit that like button, and I'll see you next time.